Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's great to be here.
Today, we are stepping into the library of the early 17th century to dust off a book that is so much more than just a dusty tome. It is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, a manifesto that attempted to reboot the human mind.
It really was.
We're discussing Francis Bacon's 1605 masterpiece, The Advancement of Learning.
A seminal text. I mean, it's almost impossible to overstate how important this specific work is. If you look at the timeline of human thought, there's a distinct line drawn in the sand, and, well, Francis Bacon is standing right there holding the stick.
It's so fascinating because when we think of science today, we have this very established idea of laboratories and peer review and the scientific method.
Right, all the infrastructure.
Exactly. But Bacon is writing at a time when none of that existed. He's looking at the state of knowledge in his world and essentially saying, we are doing this all wrong.
All wrong. He views the intellectual world of his time as just completely stagnant. He sees it as a lot of people arguing about words or, blindly following ancient authorities like Aristotle. But nobody is actually looking at the world. Nobody is actually trying to solve the problems of human suffering. So the advancement of learning is, in essence, a map. He says, here is what we know, which, by the way, isn't much. Here's what we don't know, which is a lot. And here's a plan to fix it.
And he's not just writing this for his friends in a philosophical club. He's writing this specifically for the king.
And that's the critical context. You absolutely have to understand that to get the book. The year is 1605.
So Queen Elizabeth I has just died.
Just died a couple years earlier.
Yeah.
The Tudor era is over. A new dynasty, a new king. King James I is now on the throne. And Bacon is, well, he's a man of two worlds. On one hand, he is a career politician and a lawyer. He wants a promotion. He wants to be in the inner circle.
So this is, in part, an incredibly elaborate job application.
Oh, absolutely. There is a fair bit of flattery in the opening, isn't there?
A fair bit is putting it mildly.
Oh, it's laid on incredibly thick. He compares King James to Hermes Trismegistus, this mythical figure who possessed the power as a king, the illumination of a priest, and the learning of a philosopher.
So he's hitting all the right notes.
It's strategic flattery, though. He's not just sucking up for the sake of it. He's trying to enlist the king as the great patron of this new project. He realizes that to fundamentally change the way humanity learns, you need resources. You need institutions. You need the state.
You need buy-in from the top.
You need buy-in from the very top.
So let's unpack the mission of this work, because Bacon has a very specific and I think revolutionary definition of what knowledge is for. He has this beautiful line where he says, knowledge shouldn't be a couch for the mind to rest on.
Right. And it shouldn't be a terrace for a wandering mind to just walk up and down on, or a tower for pride to look down from.
All these wonderful images of uselessness.
They really are. He says knowledge should be a rich storehouse for the glory of God and the relief of man's estate. And that phrase, the relief of man's estate, that is the absolute heartbeat of all Baconian thought.
So it's practical? It's applied?
It has to be. He believes the point of learning isn't just to be smart or to win arguments in a dusty university hall. It's to make life better, to cure diseases, to invent technologies, to reduce suffering, to, make things better for people.
Which brings us to the structure of the book itself. It's divided into two main parts. The first part is essentially Bacon the lawyer standing up in court and arguing for the value of learning. He's clearing away all the objections.
And there were so many objections. You have to remember the intellectual climate. You had the divines, the theologians who were deeply suspicious of this new kind of science. You had the politicians who thought scholars were, frankly, useless dreamers.
Ivory tower types.
Exactly. And then, maybe most importantly, you had the errors of the learned men themselves. Bacon saves his sharpest critiques for his own kind.
Okay, let's start with the divines. What was the church's beef with expanding knowledge in 1605? It seems like a classic conflict.
It is, and it goes right back to the Garden of Eden. The original sin, after all, was eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the argument from the pulpit was often, knowledge puffeth up, it leads to pride, it leads to atheism.
If you study the natural world too closely, you stop relying on God. You think you can figure it all out yourself.
That was the fear. And how does Bacon handle that? Because he can't just dismiss the church. He's writing to a very devout king. He has to tread very carefully.
Right.
And he's incredibly clever here. He makes a crucial distinction. He distinguishes between the proud knowledge of good and evil, which was the cause of the fall, where man tried to make his own moral laws, and the pure knowledge of nature.
So he splits knowledge into two types.
Yes, he argues that God created the natural world, so studying it is actually a form of worship. It's studying God's works. It's like admiring a great painting to better understand the artist.
He has that famous axiom, doesn't he? Something about a little philosophy versus a lot.
He does, and it's brilliant. A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion.
Unpack that. What does he mean?
His point is that if you only look at the surface of things, what he calls secondary causes, you might think everything is just mechanics and atoms, a superficial understanding. But if you go deeper, if you really study the intricate laws of physics and biology and see how unbelievably interconnected everything is, you eventually have to ask what set it all in motion. You circle back to the prime mover. You circle back to God.
That's a very persuasive argument for the time.
It is. And he adds a corrective, too, which is just as important. He says knowledge is only dangerous if it lacks charity.
Charity in the sense of love for humankind.
Precisely. If your goal is to help your neighbor, to relieve suffering charity, then there's no limit to how much you can know. You can't be too learned if you're using that learning to heal the sick or feed the hungry. The motive purifies the action.
Okay, so he handles the theologians with this very deft argument. Then he turns his attention to the politicians. I love this section because it feels like an argument you could hear today.
It really does.
The politician says, scholars are lazy. They sit in their ivory towers reading books while we are out here doing the real work of running the country. They're indecisive. They're too soft for action.
And Bacon just takes this head on. He doesn't apologize. He appeals to history, which is the politician's favorite playbook. He points out that some of the greatest men of action in all of history were also the most learned.
Who does he bring up?
He brings up Alexander the Great. Alexander wasn't just a brute conqueror. He was tutored by Aristotle. He supposedly carried Homer's Iliad with him everywhere in a precious casket. He questioned philosophers in every city he conquered. Bacon argues that learning doesn't make you soft. It actually makes your mind more flexible, more capable of command. He also mentions Julius Caesar, who was a brilliant writer and orator.
And he uses a medical analogy there, right? To counter the idea that learning makes you weak.
He does, and it's a great one. He says that the unlearned statesman is like an empiric physician, someone who had a few granny's recipes that might work for a specific common headache, but they don't understand the body as a whole.
I see.
So if the patient comes in with a complex fever or a strange new disease, the empiric is lost. He just has his one or two tricks. The learned man, however, understands the causes of things, the principles of health, so he can adapt to new situations. Learning is the medicine for the defects of the mind.
So having defended learning from its external enemies, the church and the state, Bacon then turns his guns inward. He critiques the learned men themselves. He calls these the three distempers, or diseases of learning. This is where he really starts swinging the hammer at the status quo.
Oh, this is the core of his critique of the entire intellectual tradition of the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. The three distempers are delicate learning, contentious learning, and fantastical learning.
Let's break those down one by one. First up, delicate learning. He calls this the vanity of words.
This is a direct shot at the humanists of the Renaissance. You had this movement where everyone became obsessed with the ancient Romans, specifically the order's Cicero. They wanted to write exactly like Cicero.
The style was everything.
Everything. They cared more about the rhythm of the sentence, the elegance of the phrase, the choice of the perfect classical word than the actual substance of what they were saying.
So it's all sizzle, no steak.
Exactly. Bacon says this is like Pygmalion falling in love with a statue he carved. It looks like a person, it's beautiful, but it has no life. Can't do anything. He says they hunt more afterwards than matter.
Then there is the second distemper, contentious learning. The vanity of matter. This is aimed at the scholastics, the medieval monks, and professors.
Right. These are the guys who, in the popular imagination at least, spent centuries debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, or arguing over incredibly intricate points of Aristotle's logic.
And Bacon must have seen this as a total waste of time.
He respects their intellect. He says they have sharp wits, like sharp knives. But he says they're working with no material. They're just cutting the air.
He uses a spider analogy here, doesn't he? It's one of his most famous images.
It's one of his best. He says the scholastics are like spiders. They spin these incredibly intricate, fine, geometrically perfect webs, but they spin them out of their own bodies. They're spinning webs of logic out of their own minds from a few axioms they got from Aristotle without ever looking at the world. The webs are impressive, but they are just cobwebs. They don't catch anything valuable. They have no substance.
So what's the alternative?
He contrasts the spider with the bee. The bee goes out into the garden, into the real world, gathers pollen from 1,000 flowers, brings it back to the hive, and then digests it and transforms it into something new and useful. Honey. Bacon wants us to be bees, not spiders.
Gather data from the world and then process it into knowledge.
Precisely.
And finally, the third distemper. Fantastical learning. This is the vanity of deceit.
This is what we would call pseudoscience. Alchemy, astrology, natural magic. Now, Bacon is interesting here. He doesn't dismiss the goals of these people.
Oh, that's surprising.
It is. He thinks trying to turn lead into gold, or trying to find the elixir of life to extend human life, are actually noble goals. They fit his mission of relieving man's estate perfectly.
So what's the problem?
He hates their methods. They rely on hearsay, on secrecy, on tradition, on what he calls credulity. They believe things without evidence. Their theories are built on imposture and wishful thinking. So he wants to take the ambitious goals of the alchemist, but apply the rigor of the true scientist.
So part one is the demolition crew. He has cleared the site of all these objections and bad habits. Now, in part two, Bacon starts to build. He attempts to map out the entire partition of sciences, a catalog of everything. And he does this by mapping the human mind itself.
Yes, this is a very influential idea. He divides all human learning into 3 massive buckets, and he says these correspond to the 3 main faculties of the brain. You have memory, which gives us history. You have imagination, which gives us poesy, literature and art. And you have reason, which gives us philosophy.
So history, poetry, philosophy, memory, imagination, reason.
That's the framework for all knowledge.
Okay, let's look at history first. Bacon acts like a surveyor here, looking for gaps on the map. He calls them deficiencies. What does he think is missing in the field of history?
He notes a huge gap in what he calls literary history. He says we have endless histories of kings and battles and politics and wars. But nobody has written a history of ideas. Nobody has tracked the state of learning itself, its rise and fall from age to age.
A history of science and philosophy.
Yes. He says that a history without this is like a statue of the Cyclops Polyphemus with the eye missing. It's missing the most important part, the spirit of the age, the thing that actually drives events.
But the most radical deficiency he notes in history is in what he calls natural history.
This is absolutely crucial for his whole scientific method. He says our natural histories are all wrong. They only focus on nature when it's behaving normally. Bacon says we need a history of nature erring.
A history of mistakes.
Exactly. We need to create a massive encyclopedia of all the monsters, the anomalies, the mutations, the freaks of nature. Because, he argues, when nature goes wrong, it reveals its own laws. When a machine breaks, you suddenly understand how it was supposed to work.
Study the exception to find the rule.
Precisely. And he also calls for a history of nature rot.
What does rot mean here?
Nature rot means nature altered by man. Technology, the mechanical arts, trades. In 1605, philosophy was for gentlemen. You sat in your study and contemplated, making shoes or dyeing cloth or building mills. That was for the lower classes. Philosophers didn't look at that.
And Bacon says they should.
Bacon flips this completely on its head. He says, if you want to understand the principles of nature, don't go to the library, go to the workshop. Look at how the blacksmith alters iron with fire, how the dyer changes the properties of wool with chemicals. That is where the truth is. He elevates the craftsman to the level of the philosopher.
That is a massive social and intellectual shift. It connects the thinkers with the doers.
For maybe the first time in a systematic way.
Now, moving to the third and biggest bucket, philosophy, which is the product of reason. He uses a pyramid metaphor here.
Yes, the base of the pyramid is natural history. Just collecting the facts, the raw data, the observations from the bee. The middle section is physics, what we would call physics in the other sciences, which is understanding the immediate causes of things.
And the top.
And at the very tip, the vertex, is metaphysic. But Bacon completely redefines these terms, especially metaphysic.
Right, because metaphysics usually meant really spooky, abstract stuff about being and nothingness. How does Bacon define it?
For Bacon, it's much more concrete. He uses Aristotle's 4 causes as a framework. He says physics deals with the material and efficient causes.
Meaning?
What is it made of, and what force moved it? So what is the statue made of? Marble. What moved the chisel, the sculptor's hand? That's physics.
Okay.
Metaphysics, for Bacon, deals with the formal and final causes. What is its essential nature or form, and what is its purpose?
And this is where he launches his famous and incredibly influential critique of final causes.
This is one of the pivot points of the entire scientific revelation. For 2,000 years, thanks to Aristotle, science was obsessed with the question why. Why does the rain fall? To water the plants. Why do we have eyelashes? To protect the eye. Why do rocks fall to the earth? Because their nature is to be at the center.
And Bacon says this is lazy.
He calls it lazy. He says searching for the purpose, the final cause, stopped you from searching for the physical cause. It's a dead end. If you say eyelashes are for protection, you stop asking how do hair follicles actually work? Or what is the chemical process that makes keratin?
I see. It closes the inquiry.
It closes it completely. Bacon wants to banish final causes from physics. He says they're like a consecrated nun, dedicated to God and therefore barren. They don't produce any offspring. They don't lead to new inventions or new knowledge.
That is such a vivid and frankly aggressive image. He's pushing for a mechanical universe. He wants to know the mechanism, not the divine intention.
Exactly. And once you understand the mechanism, you can manipulate it. If you know how eyelashes grow, maybe you can invent a cure for baldness. If you just know they are for protection, you can't do anything with that information. It's useless for relieving man's estate.
He also touches on human philosophy, the science of man, and he divides this pretty straightforwardly into the science of the body and the science of the mind.
In the body section, he talks about medicine, cosmetic, athletics. And again, he is highly critical of the doctors of his day. He says they are too philosophical and not practical enough. They read Galen, but they don't do enough dissections. They need to study the footsteps of diseases. He even, very radically, suggests they should study how to make death easier. Euthanasia, in the original sense of a good, calm passing, not actively killing.
And what about the mind? This is where he attacks the very way we think. He critiques the syllogism.
The syllogism had been the primary tool of logic for centuries. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Bacon says this is basically a circular argument.
How so?
It doesn't give you new knowledge, it just rearranges what you already claim to know. If your initial premise, your first statement, all men are mortal, is wrong, the whole thing collapses. And how do you know all men are mortal? You just assumed it.
So what does he propose instead?
He proposes his new method, induction, true induction, starting with the particulars. Observation. You don't start with a general rule. You look at 1,000 specific instances of heat or motion or light from every possible source, and you slowly, carefully build up to a general rule. It's the bottom-up approach versus the old top-down approach.
He also gives a brief mention of the idols here, right? The idols of the mind.
He touches on them, yes. He develops the idea much more in his later work, the Novum Organum, but he plants the seed here. He says the human mind isn't a clear mirror perfectly reflecting reality. It's an enchanted glass. It has built-in distortions.
Our biases.
Exactly, our cognitive biases. We have the idols of the tribe, which are flaws in human nature itself, like seeing patterns where there are none. The idols of the cave are personal biases from our upbringing and education. The idols of the marketplace, the confusion caused by language. And the idols of the theater, the false philosophical systems we get trapped in. He's warning us that our own brains are hardwired to trick us.
Okay, let's move to part 3 of our deep dive. This section is called The Architecture of Fortune. And honestly, reading it, it feels like Bacon suddenly turns into a career coach from the 21st century.
It is surprisingly pragmatic, isn't it? But you have to remember, Bacon was a climber. He desperately wanted to be Lord Chancellor. So he includes this section on civil knowledge. He makes the point that philosophers usually write about abstract virtue, but they almost never write about how to actually succeed in the world.
He calls it the knowledge of negotiation. It's very practical. So what are his rules for getting ahead?
Well, first he says you have to know others. And he's a bit cynical about this. He says you can't trust people's words. You have to watch their deeds. But even more specifically, he says you should observe people when they are surprised or when their passions are aroused. When a person is off guard, their true nature comes out.
Very shrewd. And know yourself.
But not in a spiritual, find your inner truth kind of way. More like doing a personal SWOT analysis.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats.
Exactly. Know your defects. If you are impatient, don't take a job that requires long, tedious negotiations. Be brutally impartial about your own abilities and limitations.
He has this concept of the engine of fortune. He says we need to make the wheels of our mind concentric with the wheels of fortune. What does he mean by that?
It means you have to adapt to your environment. Don't row against the stream. If the times are changing, you have to change with them. Be flexible. He also gives this wonderful piece of advice. Always have a window to fly out of.
Meaning always have an escape plan.
Always have an escape plan. Never back yourself into a corner where you have no retreat. And another one is imitate nature, which for him means do nothing in vain. Make every action serve multiple purposes if you can. Be efficient with your efforts.
Is this cynical? It sounds a bit like how to win friends and influence people mixed with a healthy dose of Machiavelli. Is he just teaching people how to be manipulative?
Bacon addresses that directly. He asks, is this selling out? Is this not a virtuous way to live? And his answer is essentially, look, learned men must know how to navigate the world. If your ultimate goal is to effect change, if you want to relieve man's estate, you need power. You need position. You can't help the world if you are ignored and powerless in the corner. So yes, learn the game so you can change the rules.
That leads nicely into the final major section, part 4, the Georgics of the mind. Georgics refers to Virgil's famous poems about farming. So this is about the agriculture of the soul.
Right. Just as we farm the land to get crops, he says, we must also cultivate the mind to get virtue. And this is another one of his major critiques. Bacon argues that moral philosophy has failed for centuries because it only describes the statue, the ideal good person.
It gives you a picture of what to be.
Yes, it tells us be courageous, be temperate, be just, but it doesn't tell us how. It doesn't give us the tools or the techniques to actually change our behavior. It describes the destination, but gives you no map to get there.
So what is his solution? How do we actually cultivate virtue in ourselves?
First, he redefines the highest good. He champions what he calls the active good. He completely rejects the monastic ideal of the Middle Ages, the idea that the holiest life is to retreat from the world and sit in a cell praying.
The contemplative life.
He says that's a lesser good. The active good, multiplying your talent, affecting the public, participating in society, is superior to the passive good of just preserving yourself or seeking your own pleasure. He quotes the Roman general Pompey, who was about to sail into a terrible storm to bring grain to Rome. His friends told him not to go, that he would die. And Pompey said, "It is necessary that I go, not that I live."
Duty to society overrides personal safety.
That's the core of it. And he has a very specific, very psychological technique for managing our emotions, or affections, as he calls them.
This is the really interesting part.
He calls it hunting beast with beast. He says you can't just destroy your passions, which is what the Stoics wanted to do. That just makes you a stone, not a human.
Yeah.
But you can use them to balance each other.
How does that work?
If you are, say, too greedy, you can't just decide to stop being greedy. The passion is too strong. But you can cultivate fear. The fear of losing what you have, the fear of disgrace, the fear counteracts the greed. If you find yourself being lazy, you should cultivate ambition. You use one emotion to tame another, like using one wolf to hunt another wolf.
It's psychological engineering. It's incredibly modern.
It is. It's treating the mind as a complex system that can be tuned and managed, just like a machine or a garden.
So we've walked through the whole manifesto, the defense of learning, the map of sciences, the architecture of fortune, and the culture of the mind. What happened next? Did King James read it and say, "Francis, my good man, here is a blank check. Go build your new science lab"?
Sadly, no. Not quite. King James was a learned man himself, but he was also notoriously stingy and a bit stubborn. He seems to have nodded at the book, been flattered by it, but he didn't immediately fund the grand instauration, the great renewal that Bacon dreamed of.
But the book didn't just disappear. It obviously had a huge impact.
Oh, far from it. It was a slow burn. This book laid the groundwork for Bacon's more famous later work, the Novum Organum. And then, later in the 17th century, the founders of the Royal Society in England, men like Robert Boyle, Christopher Wren, Robert Hooke, they explicitly cited Bacon as their guiding inspiration. They felt they were building the Solomon's House, the great college of research that Bacon had dreamed of.
And the French encyclopedists in the 18th century.
Diderot and D'Alembert, when they set out to create the Great Encyclopedia, which was an attempt to catalog all human knowledge, they basically took Bacon's partition of sciences from this book and used it as their organizing principle, their table of contents for everything. They dedicated the work to him. They called him the immortal chancellor.
So that shift from asking why to asking how really is what defines the modern world, isn't it?
I think so. We stopped asking, why does God send the plague? And started asking, how does the bacterium transmit from person to person? And that shift in the question, from teleology to mechanism, is what gave us antibiotics and steam engines and computers and the internet. In many ways, it all starts with Bacon clearing away the cobwebs.
Well, before we wrap up, we always like to push these ideas to their limits. It's time for our thought experiment segment.
And time for the disclaimer. These scenarios are for entertainment and educational purposes only. We are just exploring the logical extremes of Bacon's framework.
Okay. Experiment number 1. Let's call this the panhistoric anomaly AI.
Oh, okay. I like it. Set the scene.
All right. Bacon called for a history of nature erring, a complete collection of every anomaly, every mutation, every mistake nature has ever made. He also wanted a history of nature rot, every technological process. So imagine we build a powerful artificial intelligence, but we don't train it on normal data. We don't show it healthy people or standard physics or successful societies.
We feed it only the disasters, the mistakes, the freaks.
Exactly. We feed it every plane crash report, every medical case study of rare genetic mutations, every engineering record of a bridge collapsing, every single history of a failed state or a market crash. We train it purely on the heteroclites, the irregulars.
And the Baconian logic here is that by studying the exception, you find the true rule. If you study 1,000 healthy hearts, you might not really understand how the valve works, but study one heart with a broken valve, and the mechanism becomes painfully obvious.
So the question for the thought experiment is, would this AI, raised on a diet of pure failure and monstrosity, have a better, deeper understanding of the universe than an AI raised on standard data?
I think Bacon would have to say yes. He deeply believed that mean and small things discover great. The twist, though, is what kind of architecture of fortune would that AI then build? If it only knows how things break, its solutions might be radically resilient, or they might be completely paranoid and dysfunctional.
Right. It might solve problems our current physics cannot touch because it sees the glitch in reality that we just ignore as statistical noise.
Or it might succumb to the fantastical learning that Bacon warned against. It might start seeing patterns in the noise that aren't actually there. It's a very fine line between a genius of anomalies and a cosmic conspiracy theorist.
True. Now, what's your second experiment?
Okay, let's try this one. Experiment number 2. The Georgics of the mind biofeedback loop.
All right. This goes back to his idea of hunting beast with beast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bacon says we can't destroy our passions, we can only balance them. So imagine a neural implant. Let's call it the Bacon chip. It constantly monitors your neurochemistry in real time.
Okay, I'm with you.
It detects when your greed levels are spiking. Maybe you're about to embezzle money from your company or gamble away your family savings. The chip doesn't turn off the greed. Instead, it follows Bacon's advice and artificially stimulates the chemical sensation of fear.
Wow.
It dumps cortisol and adrenaline into your system. It simulates the gut-wrenching terror of being caught, of poverty, of public shame.
So it automates the hunt. It uses the beast of fear to hunt the beast of greed.
Precisely. Or if it detects you're being lethargic, what he called sloth, it hits you with a controlled spike of ambition, or maybe even envy of your neighbor's success to get you moving and productive again.
The implication here is fascinating. Bacon wanted the active good. He wanted us to be useful, productive members of society. This chip would, in theory, guarantee that. We would all be perfectly balanced, productive citizens. But
What do we lose?
do we lose free will?
It's not just free will, is it? We lose the struggle. Bacon talks about the Georgics, the farming, the cultivation. Farming is hard work. You have to till the soil. You have to pull the weeds by hand. If the chip does all the weeding for you automatically, is it still virtue? Or is it just a kind of industrial compliance?
You're right. It industrializes the soul. It turns the culture of the mind into a factory assembly line, which, in a very ironic way, fits perfectly with Bacon's own obsession with nature rot and mechanical arts.
It really does. It's the ultimate application of mechanic arts to the human spirit itself. I have a feeling Bacon might actually have signed up for the beta test.
He probably would have been first in line. So, bringing it all back, what does this book, written over 400 years ago, mean for us today?
Bacon ends his work with this beautiful, humble metaphor. He compares all of his efforts to the tuning of instruments before a concert. And tuning isn't music. It's often a screeching, unpleasant noise. Twisting pegs, tightening strings, it's awkward. But you have to do it to make the sweet music possible later. He saw himself as just preparing the way.
And that is our challenge to you, the listener. We are living in the rich storehouse that Bacon dreamed of. We have access to infinite information. But are we making music with it?
Or are we just suffering from his distempers? Are we lost in fantastical learning, drowning in fake news and conspiracy theories? Are we stuck in contentious learning, fighting endlessly in social media comment sections, just spinning cobwebs of anger and tribalism?
Are you tuning the instrument or just making noise? Think about that. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the advancement of learning.
Until next time.